Well, this request says, I'm getting lost with all these color terms I keep hearing. I watched a podcast yesterday where two artists were talking about color, and one of them mentioned something like chroma range. What is chroma range? Well, there's another problem we've got to solve. Well, the word chroma kind of gets bounced about from different viewpoints, from the viewpoints of the physics of light, or the viewpoint of the pigments of color, all this sort of stuff. When that word is used, the chroma is actually referring to the hue in a color. So when artists often will have used that term chroma to indicate the intensity of, or the saturation of a hue of a color. And of course, the word intensity is also used for that. And in recent years, I've tried to ditch that term, both those terms altogether when I'm discussing color, and use the term saturation for that. This is a little bit different. Each one of these hues, or chroma, but I'm going to refer to them as hues because that is the specific name of colors, the hue of the color itself. So, and it doesn't get confused with all the physics of color or in other ways that chroma can be used. So let's just use that word hue and we'll know what we're talking about. Our hues are outlined for us on a color wheel. The yellow, orange, red, etc. Those colors that we learned back in grade school, or maybe even before that. So those are the hue names. Now, what happens with a hue in light is that they're depending on the amount of light and the color of the light. But let's say if it's white light hitting a hue or an image that is a particular hue, the actual color or hue will appear on any image at different strengths. That means that only one area will you see it at its full strength if it's a pure hue. Now you can do an experiment with this by using maybe something like a lemon, which is yellow, and shine a flashlight on it. And then look carefully at what is happening to the hue. Now, when the hue, let's take the color, the hue yellow, for example. So when yellow as a hue, we'll put it right here. When yellow is hit by strong light, it loses some of its hue. When that hue falls into really, really strong light, I'll try to show you just as best I can what you're going to see, what's going to happen. As it falls into strong light, it goes in this direction, it's going to lose some of its hue. Now, we are talking about white light. We're not talking about light is warm or cool. We're talking about light that is right there in that white light area. Also, let's see how far it can go. If an image is being hit by directly, so let's just pretend it's a ball or a lemon, something that's round, where it's being hit most in alignment with that light, it's just going to go white. Now, all hues will do that, but each one of them has a range at which it can remain, a range at which the hue can remain in there. And that is what we mean when we say chroma range. So then what happens is that as the light rays hit the surface, the most rays that will hit the area of an image that is directly in line with the light. and then it begins to get more yellow as the lemon or the ball or whatever it is, as it turns away from that light source, it begins to we begin to see more of that yellow in there, and there'll be a space right in there, somewhere along that, where we will see the actual hue of the yellow. And then what happens is as it begins to continue to curve away from that light source, it begins to lose more hue again, and because it's beginning to move into shadow. Now I'm going to try to show you briefly what happens there. I'm using the yellow hue because it has the shortest range, the shortest hue range, shortest chroma range. We can see as light is hitting yellow, it will lose hue faster as it goes into shadow than some of the other hues. So each hue has its own, shall we say, its own length at which the hue can remain that hue before it begins to lose that hue and take on another quality. Well, what happens with the yellow there, let's see if I can sort of simulate that for you. And if you will try and experiment with the lemon and flashlight, you can really observe this stuff. Now, the interesting thing is that as the hue moves away from those light rays, like that, it begins to get, when it loses its hue, it's getting more desaturated or less saturated. And the hue will eventually just go away. You won't recognize it as yellow anymore. On the backside of the lemon, it will be some other hue. Now, some lemons, you may have noticed, are more yellow-orange, and some are more yellow-green. And so there's another thing, that if it's more yellow-orange, then it's going to begin to take on a little bit more of the orange that's in the hue before it sort of begins to, you would call it brown, probably. But brown is not a hue. Brown is a generic color that describes what yellow-orange or orange does when it is less saturated. So let's see. Now, to get this working, when we're depriving a color of its hue, it's best to start with its complement, yellow, violet. So I've got a violet here on my palette. So if I start with that complement, and I begin to add a little bit of that into the yellow, like I did right there. I didn't have that palette knife clean. Let's see what that is. There we go. Right there. That is what we will see next. Something like this. And I've got that, I jumped too quick, but you can see. And you see that begins to feel a little bit like what you would call, or what we would call, yellow ochre. It's beginning to lose its yellow hue as it moves into shadow. And you'll see that. You'll see that actually happening on lemons that pretty much register in that yellow. And then the more it turns away on the backside of the lemon, where it's really in shadow, it's going to lose even more of that hue. So this is sort of a little shortcut, but gives you a start for you to be able to do a demonstration for yourself. The best way you can learn this stuff is to experience it. The best way to experience it is to do what I'm doing here, examine what happens, rather than take somebody's word for it. So, that having been said, let's take a little bit more of that violet now, and add a little bit more of that violet into, let's hit a little bit more, going to get a little bit darker. Now, I'm going to make a considerable jump here, but you can see what's happening there. It's losing more of its hue. You see this? This is probably what you're going to see on the, as the lemon is on the back side of, you would say, the lemon. So there's a very narrow area there where we're really able to read it as yellow. It begins to become something else in this direction, and it simply loses its strength in this direction. So that little distance right there, where we can still call it yellow, that is its hue range, or its chroma range. And if we were desaturating, we would call it its saturation range. And all that means is that it's a distance. It's like a value range. We use that word to describe something about the distance of things or distance of color characteristics. And we're familiar with how the range of a value scale as it gradates from like middle value to light or middle value to dark. Well, this is a hue scale, you might say, the distance with which we can still recognize that as yellow. Now, let's go to jump to a blue hue. You can take whatever colors you have at their high saturation and do this experiment with your colors. Just simply desaturate, take them with white in one direction here to sort of get an idea of what happens when the light hits it really, really strongly, and then begin to use the complement in this direction to examine what happens when that image moves more and more into shadow. Fewer light rays hit, as light rays, any light rays hitting it, it's not in shadow yet. But then when it reaches a point where no light rays from the light source can hit it, it begins to go into shadow. It's a really, really neat thing that light does. And that's another thing I mean when I say the behavior of color. So let's do one more now and can show you the difference when we're talking about the distance and the range. We see it more in the light range than we see it in the shadow range. All right, so I've got a color here that falls in the blue range. This may be one. And by the way, the strength of the pigment here will also affect that. Well, that would mean by the strength of the pigment, the tinting strength of the pigment. All right, now let's pull some more white down. Let's take some white here that's not been contaminated with yellow. And this color is blue that leans towards green. This is we call it a green blue or a greenish blue. And I'll just put a little bit in here to show you. Let's see, I'll get a little bit more right here. Now, first I want to show you, if you see an image that's this color, say you've got a ball, you've got a blue ball, and let's say that the local color, in other words, if you're holding the ball in your hand, the local color is the hue at that value and at that saturation that you're seeing it, as if, you know, it doesn't have a direct light source influencing it strongly. Well, we might say that this would be the local color right here. And now, so I'll put that right here. As that local color moves more and more towards the light, if it turns, say your ball now is beginning to turn more, or the position of the ball as it comes around like this, beginning to turn more towards the light, then we have a range here at which we can still see the blue. And what you'll notice is that the range here of recognizing blue before it loses its hue is a longer range. So I'll get that just a little bit more. This may, for some of you who are already very versed in color, this may seem a little simplistic for you, but a lot of people get confused by color. And so I think you can find this very, very valuable. Now, we can still identify that as blue. So we'll be able to identify this blue as blue a pretty long distance. All right, now let's go into the shadow area. And so we'll use there, and I've got a little red orange up here. So that green, the blue that leans towards green, see green here, red, orange is the complement of it. As it moves towards green, it becomes a little bit more orange than red. So what I'll do here there to compensate for that is I'll just add a little bit of my, get that right in there, a little bit of my yellow orange to that, get that leaning a little bit more so that we got a good complement there. Now, so here's what's going to happen here. At the same blue, we'll add just a little bit of its complement to it right here. And then we begin to see, we can still see that blue. We can still, it gets darker, but we still read it. Whereas here, this began to change. It's beginning to lose its yellow faster. This doesn't lose its hue as fast. So that means we have a longer range of blue in this direction than we have of yellow in this direction. So I'll take that just a little bit further and we'll see, can we still read it as blue? It feels like a desaturated blue here, but we can still see the blue in it. And see there, we can still read blue in that. So we get a longer blue range here. That hue doesn't lose its identity as fast in the blue as it does with yellow. So you'll notice that as the colors go around the color wheel, it seems to sort of work like this. The ones that are closer to yellow, as they move towards blue, they begin to take a little bit long or have a little bit longer range of retaining their hue when they go into shadow or when they go into bright light. As they move around the wheel and it just gets a little bit longer, it gets to blue, and then when it starts going back towards yellow, it begins to get a little shorter. That's really kind of interesting. So there you have it. That is you might say my truncated or maybe simple version of the term, and it's just a matter of getting that concept of what happens to hue, our individual hues, as they move towards strong light and then move into shadow. Do that experiment. I think you'll find it's a lot of fun. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.